Have you ever been treated as if your life no longer had any value? As if all your sacrifices, all your years of dedication to your family, meant absolutely nothing? I was. And I will never forget the chill that ran through me in that hospital, not because of the cold stretcher they placed me on, but because of the words someone blurted out, "She won't last long anyway." In that moment, I realized that, to them, I was already dead. I, who had dedicated my entire life to my son and grandchildren, who sewed clothes late into the night so nothing would be missing, who baked cakes on Sundays just to see a smile, was now just a forgotten burden. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt the pain of becoming invisible to those you gave everything for? Every minute in that hospital felt like an eternity. The nurses looked away, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway, but no one saw me. It was as if my presence made no difference. And as the silence crushed me, memories came flooding back. Sleepless nights nursing fevers, stories told to soothe dreams, loving advice given. It all seemed in vain. Now I was just the forgotten grandmother in the hospital, the discarded, worthless, elderly woman. What hurt most wasn't my fragile body, but the injustice, the ingratitude. I had given everything and received in return only silence and abandonment. But would my story really end this way? Could a lifetime of love be erased by a few cruel words? I tried to hold back the tears, but they fell heavy, each one carrying years of unrecognized sacrifice. Yet, along with the pain, something different began to grow within me. An invisible, almost divine force lifted me from within. God knew the truth, knew everything I had done. And even though the world couldn't see me, I felt He saw me. This feeling didn't erase the pain, but it lit a new flame. I didn't want to let that humiliation be the end of my story. As much as they thought I had no more time, there was still life within me. And every breath was a reminder that justice was still being written. There, amidst tears and silence, I began to realize, perhaps that moment was just the beginning of something bigger. Maybe I still had the strength to rise and surprise everyone. Because when you're left for dead, but still believe your life has value, every step becomes resistance, response, justice. And it was in that moment, when no one believed in me anymore, that something began to change. A silent but powerful decision took shape. They thought I wouldn't last. But I decided I wouldn't be forgotten. What happened next is something you need to see with your own eyes. Before arriving at that cold hospital, before hearing those cruel words that echo within me to this day, I lived a simple yet meaningful life. A life in which every small gesture was an act of love, even when my body was tired, even when my mind was crying out for rest. I believed that family was the greatest treasure anyone could have, and I gave my all so that my loved ones would never be in need. I remember when Robert was still a child. Mornings began early, often before sunrise. I would get up quietly, put the kettle on, and already think about the day's tasks. Sewing clothes for others was my way of earning extra money, but what moved me most was seeing my son dressed in something I'd made myself. Each stitch carried a piece of my heart. While the neighbors talked about trips, about new clothes from the local shop, I smiled silently, because my pride was different. It was in Robert's eyes as he put on a shirt I'd just finished. The smell of baked apples filled the house on Sundays. Baking was almost a ritual. I didn't have many luxuries to offer, but I believed a warm slice of cake could warm even the coldest souls. Robert would sit at the table, eat, and sometimes even lick his fingers, and I would melt just watching. At that time, I was certain I was making memories that would never be forgotten. There were also the long nights, the ones when his fever kept me awake. I would sit there beside his bed, holding his small hand, praying softly that God would keep him safe. I didn't mind waking up with eyes red from exhaustion. All I wanted was for him to wake up feeling well, smiling, ready to face the day. For me, that was the true meaning of life. To care, to protect, to give oneself completely. My world was small, but full of meaning. While others dreamed of recognition outside the home, I dreamed only of seeing my son grow up with dignity. I believed this kind of love had no expiration date, that gratitude would be the natural return after so many sacrifices. Perhaps I lived in a kind of sweet illusion, believing that sowing love would always bring love back. It's curious how time passes without us noticing the cracks appearing. Behind the scenes of life, as I sewed and cooked, reality was transforming. Small signs of distance emerged, but I chose to ignore them. I told myself it was normal, part of life's journey, that children grow up, that routines change. I never imagined those cracks would turn into walls of silence. I looked at Robert and still saw the boy I'd once had to hold in my arms, but he was already looking at me as if he saw someone outdated, someone who had already fulfilled their role. It hurt in a way that's hard to explain. The hidden truth no one talks about is that sometimes the love you give gets lost in places where gratitude never blossoms. Even so, I kept believing. He made the coffee, ironed the clothes, offered advice that often went unheeded. I believed that this was what being a mother was all about. Giving without expectation, trusting that one day recognition would come. And each time he pulled further away, I told myself it was just a phase. But something inside me was already beginning to shift. Small doubts crept into my mind, questions about how far it was worth completely erasing myself. It was as if I was standing before a mirror that showed two versions. The woman who sacrificed everything and the woman who was beginning to realize that, perhaps, she was erasing herself too much. These thoughts came in waves, always silenced by a faith that kept me steadfast. I repeated, "One day, he'll understand." That was the phrase that sustained me. But time, that implacable judge, was already preparing something I couldn't foresee. And it was in this contrast between a simple life, full of love and dedication, and the first shadows of distance, that my story began to take a different turn. A turn I never imagined when I held that small hand on feverish nights, or when I saw my son smile with a piece of warm apple pie in front of him. Something silent was already being written, and I didn't yet know that every choice, every silence, and every forgetfulness had a much greater impact than I could have imagined. At first, I still tried to convince myself that nothing had changed, that family love remained strong, simply hidden by the rush of modern life. But the truth, that hidden truth that hurts more than any wound on the body, gradually revealed itself, almost like a shadow growing unnoticed. The first signs of ingratitude didn't emerge suddenly. They emerged in details, in words spoken on the phone, in visits that began to become fewer, in silences that replaced the conversations of old. I remember one afternoon when I called Robert. I just wanted to hear his voice, to feel like I still mattered. The call was short, cold, and emotionless. He said, "Mom, you need to understand that you can't depend on us." It was as if an iceberg had settled over my chest. I wasn't asking for anything grand, just a few minutes, just a little attention. But in that sentence, there was an invisible wall, a barrier that placed me in a place I never imagined I would be, a place of discomfort, of weight, of burden. The visitors changed too. At first, they came on Sundays, then every 2 weeks, until they became a rare appearance. When they were with me, Linda's look made it clear she'd rather be anywhere else. I pretended not to notice, offered coffee, struck up a conversation, but the silence between them spoke louder than any words. It was as if my presence was tolerated, never celebrated. These small gestures, which to many might seem trivial, had a devastating impact. Because those who have spent their entire lives giving feel each absence like an open wound. Each flimsy excuse, "We're too busy, life is hectic," was a reminder that the time I had dedicated myself to was no longer valuable. I silently wondered, was loving so much a mistake? Would my journey as a mother and grandmother go unrecognized? I sought strength in faith, telling myself that it was all just a phase, but within me, the transformation was already happening. It wasn't just pain. It was also an awakening. I was beginning to notice the mindset of those around me, their emotional distance, the decisions they made without even considering their impact on me. And this hurt in a way no illness could cause. Some days, I'd find myself staring out the window, waiting for a car to pull up in front of the house, waiting to hear footsteps at the door. But nothing happened. With each empty afternoon, I'd remember the behind-the-scenes moments of my life, the nights of sacrifice, the days I'd given up on myself, all so Robert could have opportunities. And now, he seemed to live as if I were just a forgotten detail, a voice from the past. His words kept coming back to me like a nagging echo. You can't depend on us. Dependency. When did a mother's love become a burden? I never asked for wealth, never asked for comfort. What I wanted was presence, affection, the simple acknowledgement that my story still mattered. This revelation cut deep, because it revealed a reality I didn't want to accept. The love I had given guaranteed no return, and gratitude doesn't always blossom where it's planted. But even in the face of this ingratitude, there was a silent strength within me, something I couldn't explain. It was as if each tear I shed was watering a hidden soil, preparing a response that had not yet taken shape. I didn't know how or when, but I felt that my life couldn't end in that sense of oblivion. And so, amidst silences on the phone, apathetic visits, and sentences that felt more like knives, I began to understand that this stage of my journey wasn't just about pain, but also about revelations. Revelations about who I was, about the impact of my choices, about the hidden truth behind human relationships. And it was on this fragile terrain, made of memories and disappointments, that the next decision began to emerge within me, without anyone around me noticing. The fall happened suddenly, like so many other things that change the course of life without warning. I was home, alone, trying to reach something in the closet, when I felt my legs give out. The hard floor hit me hard, and for a few seconds I thought I wouldn't be able to get up. The pain was intense, but even more painful was the realization of my own body's fragility. I, who had so often been the foundation, now depended on others even to lift me up. At the hospital, the lights were cold, the walls white, and the mixed smells of medicine and cleaning suffocated me. The doctor was blunt. I would need a companion, someone who could stay by my side during the treatment. I did what any mother would do. I trusted my son would answer the call. I called, explained the situation, and asked for his presence. He said he would find a way, that he was busy, but that he would come. I believed him. I still believed him. Hours passed, and the hallway filled with hurried footsteps, voices calling names, patients being wheeled around. But no one appeared to me. When the nurse approached and asked if anyone was coming, I swallowed hard and said yes, he was on his way. But deep down, I already knew he wouldn't come. It's strange how we feel when we've been forgotten, even before confirmation. The next day, I heard comments not meant for me. Cutting phrases, spoken as if they were mere observations of life. She disrupts our lives. It was about me. I was the interruption, the burden, the obstacle. I heard it lying on a gurney, surrounded by machines that provided more company than the people I called family. And there, between white walls and a deafening silence, I understood the depth of loneliness. I didn't cry in front of others, but inside, my heart seemed to shatter into smaller and smaller pieces. How could someone who had received so much care from me leave me there, forgotten? I remembered the days when Robert, still a boy, would run feverishly into my arms and I would stay up all night, caring for him. I remembered the times I'd worked twice as hard to pay for his education, the hand-sewn clothes, the apple pie he loved so much. All those memories now blended with the cold sound of the machines, as if they no longer held any value. Each nurse who entered the room looked at me with silent compassion, but also with the urgency of someone with many others to care for. And I understood. To them, I was just another patient. To me, that moment was a cruel portrait of ingratitude. I didn't want pity, I wanted presence. I wanted to hear my name called by someone in my family. I wanted to feel that I still mattered. But their absence weighed more heavily than any physical pain. The following days dragged on. I watched the changing light through the window, waiting for the door to open. But only strangers entered. The phone on the nightstand seemed silent of its own accord, as if it had forgotten that my existence still depended on a call. It was then that I realized how people's mindsets can transform bonds into invisible chains. To them, I was a burden. To me, I was a mother, a grandmother, a woman with a story. The hidden truth is that no one wants to face aging, because it reveals the future everyone fears. And amidst that silence, I began to question myself. What impact had my life truly had? Had everything I'd done been in vain? Would my entire journey of dedication end in an empty hospital room, with no familiar voices, no familiar hands to hold mine? Loneliness seemed to scream louder than any machine alarm, and yet I remained still, in a silent vulnerability that only those who live it can understand. But it was in this emptiness that a small flame began to blossom. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hatred. It was a subtle force, like a thread of light shining through a closed window. I couldn't explain where it came from, but I knew it was growing inside me. And although I was still there, surrounded by cold walls and the absence of the one I loved most, I sensed something was about to change. I didn't know exactly what, or when, but that feeling became impossible to ignore. The next few days in the hospital dragged by like a silent punishment. The clock on the wall seemed to mock me, each second marked by a ticking sound louder than any words I could hear. The room door opened and closed only for hurried nurses, doctors with clipboards, technicians checking machines. But no familiar faces. No children. No granddaughters. Nothing but emptiness. The silence that filled that space wasn't just the absence of voices. It was confirmation of a hidden truth I didn't want to admit. I had been forgotten. Lying on that bed, my body frail and my heart heavy, I began to revisit memories, as if my mind desperately searched for a reason to justify that abandonment. I remembered the early mornings I'd worked double time, sewing clothes until my fingers bled, to ensure Robert had new notebooks at the start of the school year. I remembered the times I'd neglected to buy myself a coat, choosing to brave the cold in a worn shawl, just so he could wear a new, dignified coat, like his classmates. I also remembered the pots of beans stretched with water to make them last longer, because I knew Robert was always hungry when he came home from school. I often ate less, or even skipped altogether, so there would be some left for him. And with each of these sacrifices, there was a hidden smile, because I believed that my dedication would be remembered, that the impact of my dedication would be etched in his memory. I was wrong. Memories transported me back in time like little movies playing before my eyes. I saw the simple house, the smell of apple pie filling the air, the rush of mornings when I divided my time between sewing and caring for my son. I saw myself walking the streets with heavy bags, while other women had time for themselves, for vanity, for rest. My journey was different, to surrender everything for his future. And in that hospital room, with the white walls surrounding me, I began to question the decisions I'd made throughout my life. Was I wrong to give so much? Was the mindset of giving myself completely what had actually condemned me to this silence now? Because what I received in return was not presence, nor recognition, but the deafening emptiness of those who no longer see value in me. The physical pain of the fall no longer bothered me as much as the invisible pain of ingratitude. That, yes, seemed to corrode every part of me. Because there is no medicine for the feeling of being discarded. There is no anesthetic that can heal the wound of realizing that, to those you loved most, you have become irrelevant. The silence of the hospital was a cruel reminder that the behind-the-scenes aspects of my life, made up of silent sacrifices and difficult choices, meant nothing to them. I thought of the feverish nights I'd spent beside Robert, the times I'd rocked him to sleep, the advice I'd tried to give him as he was becoming a man. Everything seemed to dissolve like smoke before the distance he now imposed between us. It was as if my every gesture had been lost somewhere in time, erased by a cold, practical mindset that sees no value in ancient stories. But as I delved into these memories, something inside me began to shift. It was a silent, almost imperceptible transformation, but one that grew with each day without visitors. Each night the room remained empty. I felt this silence not only destroying me, but also preparing me, as if each memory of sacrifice was also a reminder of the strength I held hidden. The revelations that emerged in these moments of solitude were harsh but necessary. I realized that life is made up of layers we often don't see. The layer of dedication, the layer of renunciation, the layer of hope. And now, faced with the absence of those who should have been most at my side, a new layer was revealed, that of awakening. Because, if the silence hurt like never before, it also made me see a truth I didn't want to accept, but could no longer ignore. The truth that, perhaps, I would have to write the rest of my story with my own hands, without expecting recognition from those who had decided to forget me. And this realization, though painful, gave me a strange feeling that something was about to change. With each day that passed in that hospital, the feeling of invisibility suffocated me more. The silence was no longer just the absence of voices. It was like a weight crushing my chest, as if I'd been buried alive in a chamber of oblivion. The white walls became a cruel mirror, reflecting back the image of someone who no longer had any value to their loved ones. And suddenly, between that emptiness and the memories that haunted me, an unexpected decision was born within me. I truly looked at myself for the first time in days, maybe weeks. My tired face, the wrinkles that held stories, my eyes still wet from the unstoppable tears. But there was something new there, hidden behind the pain. A flame. A quiet strength that said, enough. If they thought I was going to die in that bed, forgotten, serving only as a statistic in a hospital, I decided I would prove them wrong. Not to them. To myself. Getting up from the stretcher wasn't easy. My body ached, every movement seemed to fight against me, as if time itself wanted to keep me lying down. But inside my mind, the transformation had already begun. It was no longer about waiting, it was about taking action. I knew that the decision to get up would change everything, because in that moment I was no longer the victim of ingratitude and became the protagonist of my own story. I can still hear the beeping of the machine as I removed the wires from my arms. The coldness of the floor beneath my feet was like a reality check. I had no one to lean on, but I also didn't want to depend on anyone anymore. With each staggering step, I felt like I was crossing not just the room, but an invisible line between who I had been and who I was about to become. It was strange, because along with the physical weakness came a mental strength I'd never felt before. As if all the humiliations, all the cruel remarks, all the accumulated silence were turning into fuel. It was a revelation I hadn't expected. That pain can also be a gateway to courage. There, amidst the switched-off machines and deserted corridors, I realized I no longer needed to wait for rescue. I would be my own rescue. The impact of this decision was so great that even the air felt different. For the first time in a long time, I took a deep breath and felt oxygen circulating again, not just in my lungs, but in my soul. And in that moment, it no longer mattered whether Robert or Linda would remember me. What mattered was that I remembered. I remembered the woman who had fought her entire life, who had survived hardship, who had raised a family with her own hands. I could not allow my end to be written by someone who lacked the courage to love me until her last day. As I walked, I saw a mix of surprise and astonishment on the expressions of the few staff members I passed. Perhaps they wondered what a frail woman like me was doing out of bed. But they didn't know that this wasn't just a tired body walking. It was the transformation of a mindset, the journey of someone who chose to no longer accept the role of the forgotten. And it was in this state of sudden lucidity that I understood. Sometimes life pushes us into abysses not to destroy us, but so we discover we can fly in another way. If I had been abandoned, if I had been left to die, then my response would be to disappear by choice, not out of neglect. To disappear, not as a victim, but as someone taking control of their own narrative. The corridor seemed endless, but each step was a liberation. It wasn't just about leaving the hospital. It was about leaving behind the image of the passive woman, the one who waited for phone calls, visits, and crumbs of attention. And as the echo of my footsteps filled the empty space, I felt something much bigger was just beginning to be written. Every step I took out of that room was like a silent scream against everything they had done to me. It was as if I was telling the world, I'm still here, and my story isn't over. This decision to get up and move on wasn't born solely from pain, but also from the need to not allow myself to be erased prematurely. And as I reflected on all of this, I realized that I wasn't just living my own personal journey. In some way, this experience also spoke to so many others who have felt forgotten, invisible, or treated like a burden. And perhaps that's why I need to make space for you now. Because stories like this aren't just mine, they carry echoes from many lives. If anything in this story has ever revolted you, if at any point you thought, this isn't fair, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, because every opinion helps show that no one should suffer this kind of abandonment in silence. And, who knows, what you share might also comfort someone going through something similar. I also want to ask you, from the bottom of my heart, to like this video. It seems like a small gesture, but it has a huge impact. This is what makes YouTube understand that these kinds of stories need to reach more people, that they can't be hidden. When you hit the like button, you're helping this message gain traction, cross borders, and touch other lives. And if you feel that this type of content resonates with you, that it somehow inspires, moves, or even comforts you, subscribe to the channel. This is how we create a community united by real stories that reflect hidden truths, silent sacrifices, and unexpected twists. Your subscription is what keeps this journey alive, allowing me to continue revealing new things and sharing every detail of this journey. It's all part of something bigger. Because, deep down, it's not just about my experience, but about how these stories connect us, showing that abandonment and ingratitude don't have the final word. And it was in this spirit of silent but firm resistance that I continued down that corridor, with a feeling that a new chapter was about to open before me. When I left that hospital behind, I didn't know exactly where I was going. I had no plan, no clear destination, but there was a strange certainty within me. I couldn't go back to the same life as before, where I was just a shadow tolerated by those who were supposed to love me. I walked the streets slowly, each corner feeling like a test of my own endurance, and yet I kept going. It was as if the decision not to accept abandonment had ignited a new force, a silent transformation that pushed me forward, even when my body wanted to stop. It was in this state of mixed vulnerability and courage that the unexpected happened. In the middle of a familiar street, I ran into someone who was part of my youth, someone I hadn't seen in decades. Clara, a friend from another time, who knew the version of me before the sacrifices, before the renunciations, before I became just Robert's mother. The encounter was like a breath of fate. She looked me in the eye and, without asking long questions, simply said, "Come with me." That was how life offered me a second chance. At Clara's house, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't a burden. She didn't see me as a burden, didn't measure me by my usefulness or my age. She simply welcomed me. And this simplicity was as powerful an impact as any revelation. Because the hidden truth I discovered there is that sometimes, those who don't share your blood can offer you more family than those you brought into the world. The first few days were strange. I still carried the pain of abandonment within me, still in the habit of waiting for a connection that wouldn't come. But little by little, my mindset began to change. Clara encouraged me to do small things, things that reminded me of who I was before I lost myself in so many sacrifices. That's how I started sewing again. At first, my hands trembled, and the thread seemed unsteady. But each stitch I made was like sewing together the pieces of my own soul. I started with simple cloths, then tried dresses, aprons, and ordinary clothes. And suddenly, Clara's neighbors became interested. One bought a dress, another asked for a repair, and there I realized something powerful. I still had value. Not as a memory of the past, but as a living present. This unexpected journey of reconstruction taught me that dignity doesn't depend on who chooses to recognize you, but on who you choose to be in the face of oblivion. Every item of clothing sold, every neighbor who thanked me for my work, was a reminder that I wasn't finished. It was as if life had given me back the stage, however small, however modest. I also realized how my own past decisions had shaped me. Years of sacrifice had taught me discipline, patience, and dedication. Now, I used all of this not to nullify myself, but to rebuild myself. The transformation lay in looking at my wrinkled hands and seeing not signs of fragility, but marks of a journey that empowered me to begin anew. At night, I found myself thinking about the behind the scenes of this whole turnaround. While Robert and Linda went on with their lives, forgetting me, I was building something new, silent, yet powerful. I didn't need to prove anything to them, but within me grew the feeling that divine justice was being served, not as revenge, but as reparation. The abandonment that knocked me to the ground was the same thing that pushed me to find Clara and rediscover my own strength. And with each passing day, the simple house where I now lived transformed into a space of hope. The sewing machine, so often a symbol of renunciation, was now a symbol of new beginnings. I no longer sewed just to keep others afloat. but to keep myself afloat. And that detail changed everything. Still, deep in my heart, there were questions I couldn't keep quiet. Because, as much as life had given me this second chance, I knew the past wasn't over yet. And at any moment, it could come knocking again, bringing new revelations and demanding decisions I wasn't sure I was ready to make. The years passed, and in that simple house next to Clara, I rediscovered something I thought I'd lost forever: peace. The sewing routine, the small orders from neighbors, the conversations on the porch in the late afternoons gradually restored a life that felt real. There were nights when I still cried silently, remembering everything that had happened, but they were no longer tears of despair, but of relief at having survived what seemed unbearable. My mindset had shifted. I no longer saw myself as a victim, but as someone who had endured a difficult journey and still remained standing. But life has a strange way of confronting us with the chapters we think we've closed. One day, without warning, my past came knocking on my door again. It was Robert, my son. The same one who once said I was a burden. The same one who didn't show up at the hospital when I needed him most. He was different, not just in the wrinkles on his face or his thinning hair, but in his eyes. There was an emptiness there, a cry for help that no amount of pride could hide. "Mom, I have nowhere to go," were his first words. I felt like the ground was falling away beneath my feet. For a moment, the old wound began to bleed again. It was as if all those days in the hospital, all those lonely nights, all that cruel silence were falling over me again. I didn't know if I wanted to hug him or turn away. Clara, who was with me, fell silent. She knew that this moment wasn't hers, it was mine. A moment of revelation, of profound impact, because it forced me to face not only Robert, but also all the decisions I'd made in my life. There was my son, no longer in the role of someone who dictated my invisibility, but in the opposite place. Someone who begged for attention. The role reversal was too clear to ignore. My eyes filled with tears, but I held them back. I had to stay strong. "You left me alone when I needed you most, Robert," was all I could say, my voice choked with the pain that never quite faded. He lowered his head, as if carrying the weight of a hidden truth that had finally surfaced. In that instant, I realized I was facing a moment of catharsis. Past and present collided brutally, bringing to the surface not only hurt but also the chance to choose how this story would impact me from then on. I could repeat what he did to me, I could return the favor, or I could use the transformation I'd experienced to show that I still had the power to decide. My heart was beating fast. I saw there not only my broken son, but the reflection of all the choices he'd made, the priorities he'd put before family, the times he believed someone would always be there to hold him. He was broken, and for the first time, perhaps, he understood what it meant to be alone. Life had given him the same bitter dose it had once forced me to swallow. But inside me, there was also another feeling. It wasn't just pain, it was also compassion. Because, despite everything, he was still my son. This was the contradiction tearing me apart, balancing the pain of ingratitude with the maternal instinct that never completely dies. The truth is, there's no manual for moments like these. It all comes down to decisions. Decisions that can change not only the fate of the one asking, but also of the one who must respond. As he spoke, explaining how he'd lost his job, how Linda had left him, how the house was no longer his, I just watched him. No excuses could erase what he'd done to me, but there was a silent revelation in his voice. He knew he'd failed, and now he was dependent on the very woman he'd once abandoned. And it was in this clash of emotions that I understood that this reunion wasn't just about him. It was about me. About my ability to deal with the injustice of the past and transform it into something that could redefine my own story. Because, one way or another, I knew that moment was just the beginning of a new turning point. A turning point I never imagined I'd experience. Robert was still there, standing before me, his shoulders slumped, his expression marked by the weight of the years and the choices that had brought him to this point. I watched him silently, trying to recognize in that weary man the same boy who had once clung to my lap on feverish nights, begging me not to leave him. The contradiction pierced me like a blade. He had once been the center of my life, the reason for my greatest sacrifices, but also the reason for my bitterest tears. And now, there before me, it was impossible not to feel that we were facing something much greater than just a mother-son reunion. It was as if we were face to face with the very law of return, the justice of life being fulfilled silently but relentlessly. The words began to spill out of me before I could even control them. It wasn't a rehearsed speech, not something I'd prepared. It was the raw truth, accumulated over years of pain and silence, finally finding its voice. "Son, I gave you everything," I said, and felt my throat burn. "I gave you my youth, my strength, my sleepless nights. I gave up my dreams so you could have yours. But you let me die in life. You lost your motherly care the day you left me in the hospital." The impact was palpable. He looked up at me, and in that look I saw something I'd never seen before. Not just regret, but also recognition of the gravity of what he'd done. It was as if, for the first time, he truly saw the extent of the wound he'd left me. I didn't need to scream or cry. The truth, spoken calmly, carried more power than any outburst of anger. Inside me, something was breaking free. For years, I'd carried the guilt of not being enough, of perhaps not having given love the right way, of being responsible for his distance. But as I spoke those words, I realized the hidden truth wasn't in me, but in him, in the decisions he made, in the mindset he chose to foster. And understanding this was like opening a window in a dark room. The pain was still there, but there was also light, there was room to breathe. Robert remained silent, as if each sentence had pierced his skin and reached his soul. He didn't try to justify himself, didn't offer quick apologies. He simply stood there, absorbing the revelation that his mother, the same one he once believed would always be available, was no longer willing to be invisible. It was role reversal in its purest form. I had been the forgotten one, the discarded one, but in that moment, he was the one begging for space, for dignity, for forgiveness. And I, paradoxical as it seemed, felt a strange serenity. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't revenge. It was divine justice, the feeling that life, with all its complexity, had arranged the pieces so that I finally had a voice. Every tear shed in the hospital, every lonely night waiting for a visit that never came, every cruel silence now found its place. Not to erase the pain, but to show me that I had survived it, that I had made it through the journey and come out the other side still whole. I looked at him and saw not only the broken man asking for help, but also the reflection of the choices that shaped his destiny. It was like watching a life crumble before me, while my own, so discredited, was being rebuilt piece by piece. The revelation lay not just in the words I spoke, but in the impact they had. Because, for the first time, he couldn't deny the truth. And in the heavy silence that followed, I realized something bigger was about to happen. As if that answer wasn't the end, but merely the beginning of a new phase, a new chapter in our story, where every decision from then on would have consequences none of us could have foreseen. As those words left my mouth, I felt a strange silence fill the room. It wasn't just the weight of what had been said, but the echo of a revelation that could no longer be ignored. For years, I'd carried within me the feeling of being invisible, as if everything I'd ever done had been forgotten, erased, discarded. But when I looked into Robert's eyes, I realized there was something bigger going on there. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about the transformation life demands of each of us when the time comes to face the consequences of our own decisions. He still stood there, his head bowed, like someone finally confronted with the hidden truth he'd always tried to avoid. And I, though I still felt the throbbing pain of ingratitude, was no longer the same woman who'd been left on a cold hospital gurney. There was a silent but powerful impact within me. I had survived, and no one could take that away from me. As the scene unfolded, my mind wandered through the scenes of my journey. I thought of every sacrifice made in silence, every sleepless night, every seemingly meaningless renunciation. All of that now took on new meaning. It was as if life had placed me before a mirror, showing me that pain can also be a ruthless but fair master. There is no transformation without confrontation, no growth without the courage to face the truth. I lifted my head, looked straight ahead, as if looking directly at those listening to me now, and felt the need to say something beyond myself. Never forget the one who gave you life. What you don't learn through love, life teaches through pain. This phrase wasn't just a warning to my son, it was a message that would cross generations. Because the law of return never fails, and sooner or later every act of disrespect, every act of neglect, every act of abandonment finds its way back. As I spoke these words, a mixture of serenity and firmness took hold of me. There was no anger, no desire for revenge. There was only the clarity of someone who understands that divine justice is served in unexpected ways. Often, what doesn't come through recognition comes through hard learning, through the shock of a reality that can no longer be denied. This was the revelation that unfolded before me, and I knew I needed to share it not just as a story, but as a lesson. Because life is made of choices, and every decision has an impact. Some believe they can live ignoring those who supported them, that there will always be someone to bear the weight of their absence. But the truth is, life doesn't allow for emptiness. What isn't filled with love ends up being charged with pain. This is the silent journey of so many who have given more than they received, and who, like me, discovered too late that they weren't appreciated. I didn't say anything else after that, just let the silence do its work of piercing the hearts of whoever was listening. Because there are times when words need to rest so that consciousness can awaken. And in that meaningful pause, I understood that I wasn't just speaking to Robert. I was speaking to everyone who once believed that love could be wasted with impunity. I looked around, took a deep breath, and felt that this wasn't an endpoint, but a different beginning. Life had given me a second chance, and now it also gave me the responsibility of being the voice of something greater. And while the discreet tears still insisted on wetting my eyes, I realized the story wasn't over. There was still more to be revealed, more paths to take, more decisions that would define the course of this journey. And if you've made it this far with me, you know this story isn't just about me. It speaks to all of us, the pain we carry in silence and the revelations life forces us to face. That's why I want to extend a simple invitation. If this message touched you in any way, leave the phrase, "No one deserves to be forgotten," in the comments. That way, I'll know you were with me until the end and that this connection resonated with you. I also ask that you subscribe to the channel. It's not just to follow more stories like this, but to be part of a space where hidden truths find a voice and where each journey can become a learning experience. Your subscription shows me that this type of content is valuable and deserves to continue. And if at any point in this narrative you were moved, please leave a like. This simple gesture helps this video reach more people who may need to hear this very lesson today. And since you're here, there's no need to stop now. There's a video right here that complements this topic, and I'm sure it will touch you in a special way. Click and stay with me there.